Climate summits are diplomatic affairs. Words said publicly are chosen carefully. But listen in the corridors of COP28 and there are clues to what people really think about phasing out fossil fuels.
He also suggested there can't be a phase-out of fossil fuels alongside sustainable development, quote, unless you want to take the world back into caves.
I feel like it's going to have somewhat of like Hummer vibes. The vibe of like, I'm a guy who drives a Hummer or I'm a guy who drives a Cybertruck. I feel like there's going to be a statement there, you know?
I mean, you're basically an Elon stan, right? If you're driving a Cybertruck.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the case with like Model 3.
I just hate that it feels like a vehicle for people to be their most dangerous, least thoughtful selves.
That's what pickups are. All of the numbers on paper except 0 to 60 are worse than they promised. Oof. And this is the first time that's true about a Tesla.
There's incredible momentum around the world when it comes to renewables. They are being driven by market forces. We have a climate imperative that countries are acting on that started the transition. But because we've seen this decline in the cost of wind and solar, that has now flipped, where we've reached a tipping point.
Hello and welcome to episode 190 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, I predict the Cybertruck will be Tesla's first flop. Brian disagrees, of course. Later in the show, he and I will arm wrestle to the death to settle this once and for all.
Leaders of the world's major cities have called for an end to fossil fuels. The mayors from the C40 group of world cities have demanded that governments commit to ending fossil fuels. Then the mayor of New York got into an argument with the mayor of Montreal about who has the best bagels, and the whole group is still embroiled in a fistfight.
Leaders of 2 Canadian oil provinces are headed to COP28, the annual UN climate conference. No word if they did the Greta thing and took a sailboat to save on carbon emissions. I'm betting they didn't.
Yeah, I'm betting they didn't. Pollution from fossil fuels is killing approximately 5 million people per year, said the president of the COP28 climate conference. Only 5 million? I mean, I'm sure it's less than that. I mean, I'm sure fossil fuels are not responsible at all. I mean, I can prove it's not true, but I'm late for an appointment. I gotta go.
All that and more in this edition of the Clean Energy Show. Brian, I just wanted to point out that we said last week the Pope, friend of the show, was heading to COP28. He is not. His doctor said he can't. They sent a Vatican official, which doesn't have the same clout as His Holiness.
Yeah. Is it because he's 170 years old?
Yeah, he's frail. You know, probably spent too much time on our show worrying about things. He's got to focus on God. He's got to get back to God.
I feel bad. Sorry, Pope Francis. We shouldn't have taken up so much of your time. Sorry.
And also this week's show, we're going to talk about Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who made a video explaining what a heat pump is, which is very unusual for a state leader to explain technology, but that's what happened, and we'll have a clip later. How are you?
Good. I got a couple of quick little updates. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Domino's Pizza and how they have these electric delivery bikes that keep your pizza warm. And these are going to be deployed in Australia. But shout out to our friend Don. He sent along a video. There's a guy on YouTube named Colin Furs, and he's got many millions of subscribers on YouTube. And he builds weird things. So he's got a video, if you're interested in looking it up, called I Built a Bike That Cooks Pizza. It's not just keeping it warm. He built a motorbike with a wood-burning oven on the back.
Wood-burning?
Yeah.
Seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing. Like, he goes through the whole process of, like, he, does a hydroforming for the oven. Like, it's made out of metal, and he welds together these pieces and then hydroforms it with high pressure water, so on and so forth. But it's a 2-person motorbike, gas-powered. He made it really long, so there's a driver that drives kind of like normal, and then there's somebody that sits at the back and can not only cook, but prepare. There's like a preparation table.
Now, did they just invent this based on our last week's show? Because I said somebody should do that, or did he already do this?
No, this was already up there. So it's not really a practical thing, but I do think there's a future perhaps for some kind of pizza delivery vehicle where you can, prepare and cook the pizzas. So they proved that it works, but, not exactly
we must
practical,
solve the pizza problem as soon as we possibly can, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely urgent. So late breaking news, I just got this morning. So here in Canada, we have a federal carbon tax. So anytime you're burning fossil fuels, you pay a carbon tax for that, which makes sense because it discourages carbon use. So I just saw this message from Sask Power, our local utility, and it turns out I'm going to get a break on my home heating that I wasn't aware of. So as the listeners probably know, I switched to an air source heat pump, so I'm now heating my home with electricity. I'm definitely a little nervous about the high bills. My power bill is going to be very high, particularly in January, the coldest month. But I was also a little bit nervous about the carbon tax because I knew I was going to have to start paying the carbon tax on this electricity because our local grid, is not clean. It burns carbon. So there is going to be a carbon tax applied to our electricity bills. Our local utility is going to give a carbon tax break for electric home heating. And
they're not giving a carbon tax break, Brian. They're not collecting it because they're being anarchists. They're being climate anarchists. But I was going to, this is my notes to mention this as a joke. That you wouldn't be able, and you're telling me you got a note saying that you won't have to pay the carbon tax? How did they figure out that you had electric heating? I mean, seriously.
Yes, there's a thing I have to go into my account and tell them. So it says in the website that.
But how did they even suspect?
There's apparently already people that are registered with them for electric home heating. So this is meant mostly, I think, for people in the far north who don't have access to natural gas, or
they're using
even
resistive heating instead of heating oil because there's no natural gas lines, and heating oil is hard to deliver or whatever.
It'd be hard to deliver it way up there. So this is really meant for people in remote places who don't really have another choice. They have to heat their homes with electricity. And of course, if they also had to pay the carbon tax on their bill, it makes, it makes the utility.
It's a tinge
more. But it also makes the utility look bad because it's not your fault if you're in the far north and you have to heat your home with electricity.
Oh, now you're defending this bullshit. You're worse than Jay.
It's not their fault. If you're in the far north and you have to heat your home with electricity, it's not your fault that the grid isn't clean. It's the fault of the utility. So, but yeah, they also announced, our provincial government announced that they're going to stop collecting the carbon tax.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. They're not going to collect it on your power bill. But we'll get into that later. I just can't believe that they somehow know that you have electric heating. Like, I don't understand how they know.
No, it's a box you check if you have an online account with them. It's a box that you can check. So I'm going to have to log in and tell them that I have electric heat so that I can get this break.
Okay. Well, we're one of the few countries, and one of the positive things that people talk about in fighting climate change is that carbon taxes are good. They want them everywhere, and now no one wants them here because inflation and all of our problems are based on a few bucks of carbon tax. And of course, we're driving electric vehicles. We've got solar panels on our house. You don't use quite the electricity that you would, or not even nowhere near the electricity you would, because you've got a fairly substantial system on your roof. So that helps too. I don't know what to say about that, but it pisses me off, obviously. They're scoundrels. I mean, it's COP time. It's COP season. We're in the 2 weeks of COP28, and we're reminded that the world is screwed. We have to do so much. A few weeks ago, somebody asked me, are you positive? Like they asked on the show in a letter or was online. And do you believe that we can decarbonize by 2035? And I said, yeah, I do. And am I optimistic about, fighting climate change? And I said, yes, but I waver. I have bad days and good days. And, there's too many bad days during COP because it's just, what they should be doing. There's literally 100,000 attendees there. They have huge facilities, and it's all funded by oil. There's oil execs galore. Exxon head is there. Our jackass premier of our Saskatchewan and Alberta's two oil-rich provinces in Canada are there, trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes and say, hey, we're sustainable. The word sustainable is a word that you should watch out for these days during COP because it's crap. It's BS. It's not reducing carbon. It's not really sustainable. It's wrecking the planet. And last summer we had smoke here for the whole frickin' summer. It's like end of days. I don't know where I'm going to move to get away from it. And it's only going to get worse. I mean, the best case scenario, it gets worse and worse and worse. It's horrible. Anyway, my daughter, wonderful news. My 16-year-old daughter just turned 16 and passed her driver's test first time. In an electric car, by the way. Our second kid to pass the driver's test in an electric car. My son did it way back, years ago. I think it was the first person in our whole province to pass a driver's exam, a road test. But the thing is with her, she had some problems. She's overcome a lot. So it was a huge, amazing thing that she passed. And of course, the instructor had to remark on the electric car, Brian. That was an inevitable thing. So yeah, he thought the braking was very nice with her generative braking and was very impressed with the Chevrolet Bolt that she took on the test. And speaking of our horrible, stupid, idiotic 20th century power utility, they sent out 2 expensive cellular monitors that plug into our cars. And now they're telling us that both of them won't work with our cars and that we can't participate in the program, which is crap. They've been stringing us along for months. And unless we have like OnStar telematics, that they're not going to be able to do anything for us. And it's just been a frustrating, stupid experience.
Yeah, so you signed up for this program because you'd save a few bucks on your electric bill, and then they collect data about people's charging habits.
Yes, and they're trying to encourage you to charge at night by, cutting 40% off your charging electricity fees at night, and see if that will work, if time of use can be, something that you can do to encourage demand reduction for electric cars. Because, I suppose they think it's coming. It is coming. Let's get on with the show, because the Cybertruck, Brian, was 2 things happening this week that were big. COP28 started, and the Cybertruck, which I've been waiting for a long time. 2019, exactly 4 years ago, pretty much, they announced the Cybertruck, and it sent ripples through the industry. I mean, they broke the windows and it became a viral sensation. So a lot of messaging got out about electric vehicles and electric trucks. And the incumbent vehicles, it's important because the incumbent automakers came out with electric trucks.
Yeah.
Some of them are on the market. Well, one of them was on the market, the Lightning.
Yeah. No, if they hadn't announced the Cybertruck in 2019, there would be no F-150 Lightning, I assume.
And there's Silverado and a Ram truck coming as well, which is important because in North America, at least, that's the number one selling vehicle is the Ford F-150, period. Not any, just, I don't know. Everyone needs a truck here because it's an arms race to have the biggest vehicle you can. And you're not masculine unless you drive a truck in North America, which is
and Canada has the least fuel efficient vehicles of any country in the world.
It doesn't make sense. Yes, it snows here, but my God, I mean, you can drive a tricycle and still get through snow if you have the right tires. God knows you do. You studded man, you studded winter tire man. So yeah, it's important, but it's also important because Tesla is important. The CEO drives us crazy and drives me particularly batty and makes me have negative feelings about the brand. But that company is truly important, and we're seeing more and more how important it is because the incumbents are not catching up. They're not doing a very good job. They had us believing they were, and it turns out they're not because their vehicles are so expensive and not very well designed for efficiency and, financial efficiency.
Yeah, no, and imagine what the electric vehicle landscape would look like without Tesla, because their success has really forced everybody else, the legacy automakers, to do electric, which they wouldn't even be thinking about if Tesla wasn't there.
Yeah, and BYD in China is coming, and there's other Chinese automakers as well. They're important, not that they're concentrating on pickup trucks. The problem with the Cybertruck, and I'm sure everyone who listens to the show knows what the Cybertruck is. It is a triangular piece of post-apocalyptic metal.
It's a refrigerator.
It's a refrigerator, stainless steel, so you can't touch it. No touching the Cybertruck. Are you buying one, Brian?
No.
You're not.
Unlikely, no.
You have a reservation. I still think it's important for you to have something that's bulletproof. And by the way, I predict people will shoot it because they said it was bulletproof, or at least modestly bulletproof. So what the Cybertruck, in my mind, needs to do is it needs to outdo all other trucks, and it didn't do that. They came out with this presentation that was botched and very poorly done. Elon Musk was tweeting about something completely different the second the event ended. Like he's like Krusty the Clown. He showed up and did his thing and left. He's not really into it. He's not really there anymore. And, he's Franz, the designer, designed the truck and pitched it, and Elon said, yes, let's do it. So we can't blame Elon, and I don't knock them for doing something that's out of the box. The problem is, Brian, ultimately my son is right. No one's going to buy this truck.
Wow.
No one is going to buy this truck.
That's a bold take.
Truck people are not going to buy this truck. That's the problem. The people who are Tesla fanboys are going to go out and buy it. They're in tech. They've got money. And they'll buy it and it'll look stupid. And people will, shoot at them. But truck people will not buy the truck. It was impressive in the presentation in that it outdid a F-350 diesel in the sort of dragging this big heavy sleigh until the truck died. They outdid that. That's the only thing it did. It's faster than it was promised. Even it's like 2.6 seconds, 0 to 100 miles an hour. Is it 0 to 60 miles an hour? 0 to 60. I get it confused because it's 100 kilometers. But yeah, so it's fast and it's got a lot of promising things, but it was promised to start at $40,000 and it's actually starting at 60. Now, yes, there's been inflation. There's been a pandemic and tremendous inflation, but that only equals 47,000. So they've gone substantially higher, and it's $100,000 for the expensive one. They promised 500 miles of range, and that it was important too, because we all thought, hey, Tesla, they'll get the price down because they're good at this, and the range will be better because they're good at this. It's not. It's only like 350. Unless you buy this range extender that you put in the bed for who knows how much and who knows how heavy.
Yeah, that was a surprising thing because they seemed to pull it off with the Tesla Semi because everyone was skeptical about the range on that. But from the testing, it sounds like the Semi did get the range they promised. The Cybertruck doesn't have the range they promised.
Part of it is the 4680 batteries. Those have been a big disappointment, a big failure.
They're just maybe not as energy dense as they were hoping, that at least so far anyway.
Yeah. And they're not, the charging speeds are horrible too. And the Model Ys that have those batteries in them, a lot of customers are not very happy. They're charging slower than advertised.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and this is supposed to charge fast. They didn't come out and say what the price was, what the range was, or anything. When people had to wait until after, it comes in under a towing as well. It says 11,000 instead of 14. So you really needed to kick the butts of everybody else and then say, hey, this is tough. But no, it's just a novelty. It's just a triangular novelty that you can't put a fridge magnet on. And I predict that they'll stop making them in 5 years. Take that. Digest that for a bit. Wow. I think and that's a big mistake for them. I think they should have either concentrated on a $25,000 car to sell in other markets, even though you can't sell a whole lot of those in North America. You should be selling as many cars as you can. And there's a huge market, obviously, because Chinese automakers are selling all kinds of small cars, very small, in fact, obviously. And some of them that would, qualify for a hatchback size $25,000 car that they could pull off quite brilliantly, I think.
Yeah, it probably would have made sense to go to the cheaper car first before the Cybertruck. But they are learning things. So it's got the 48-volt architecture for the interior cabin, and that's a big deal. And they'll be able to use that on cars going forward. It's got steer-by-wire, which will probably be used on cars going forward. So it's got some tech that they had to start somewhere. And
and that's a good thing. And most cars, as most people know, are 12 volts. You buy a 12-volt battery for your car. Well, electric cars have those too, to run the computer, not to crank anything, but to run the computer, and just it gets recharged, and the fans and everything and things like that. Well, they changed that to 48 volts, so the wires are actually smaller and lighter. because if you have more volts, the watts go down, so the wire doesn't have to have so much resistance in it, and it can be a lot lighter. And there's a lot of wires in modern cars, especially Teslas.
Yeah, and it sounds like the 48 volt is necessary for the steer-by-wire. That's probably why nobody has done steer-by-wire
before. Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it needs more power. It needs more volts.
Well, Marcus Brownlee has a weekly show, and one of his co-hosts said this about the Cybertruck, and I thought I would throw that out there. I've got a clip, and it kind of has to do with designing something freaky and then having to engineer around it.
Yeah, well, it feels like they decided all of these boundaries and rules that they wanted to break because they thought it would be like fun and cool. And then they had to endlessly over-engineer every single part of that truck to still make it work with those like initial ideas in mind.
That's exactly how I feel.
But it's not like, it's not the next step in trucks. It's not the next step in anything. It's just a really weird truck with a lot of really cool engineering to allow it to be weird and still cover the bases.
It's the same thing as like the Steve Jobs, like, I needed to do this. And the engineers go, that's not physically possible. And he goes, make it happen.
Yeah, I'll remind you that Elon Musk himself said the Cybertruck could be a flop. So he's less bullish than you are, Brian. So yeah, Top Gear says they had a model and watched their video, and they took it to somewhere and found people who didn't believe that anyone was actually going to make it. One guy said, they're not making that. There's no way. They're not making that. And he said, well, it's out. No, they're not making that. And that was the truck guy. So 123 kilowatt hour battery, according to Top Gear, who apparently got information, because not everybody got information, because Tesla doesn't have a PR department in North America. They also confirmed in that interview that it's not for sale in Europe, won't be, because of the pedestrian safety. And the front end is, well, it's sharp. I wouldn't even want to walk past it in a parking lot and bump into it. I'd like cut myself open. It just seems really not safe for people at the front. Well, the 800 volt battery, that's a 800 volt battery architecture, which is new for them. There's usually 400, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're saying 15 to 85% in about 20 minutes or so. So that's really good. That part is good. They split the battery into two sections. It talks to the charger, and the car splits the charge that's coming in so that it can charge faster. I think that's a brilliant idea. Why aren't they doing that in all cars? Or at least, longer range cars like your Model S, for example, that has a long range. Like, wouldn't that be a cool idea to split the battery and charge faster?
Yeah, I guess they could. It's a smaller battery. It's around 100 kilowatts in the Model S.
Split it into 250s and charge at 350 instead of 250. I mean, you're doing fine with it. It's not a big problem, but I'm just saying,
problem, but
it could be an interesting wave of the future of doing things like that to encourage people to adopt. So yeah, 48 volt wiring, as you said, runs the computer, lights, etc. I asked people on Twitter, will it be a niche product or will it compete with mainstream trucks? And lo and behold, 53.6% of the people said it will compete with mainstream. So they're all Tesla people. We got a lot of Tesla people with the show here, which means I offend them every week as well as nuclear people.
If you want an electric pickup truck, I think it's a good choice. Like, I think if I had to choose between the F-150 Lightning and the Cybertruck,
you can't drive down the street. You might as well be naked with an erection standing on top of your vehicle singing the national anthem. You're not going to be, not getting attention. It's going to be a not necessarily positive attention, especially around these parts.
I think that's fine. But then, in a couple of years, it won't be that sort of a weird thing. But I would pick it over the F-150 Lightning. It bodes well for Rivian because the Rivian trucks are very expensive, but now they don't look quite so expensive now that the Cybertruck prices have revealed to be, as high as they are. So, and I should disclose, I actually bought some Rivian shares a couple of months ago. So I have some shares in Rivian as well as Tesla shares. I'm a Tesla investor for those who are new to the show, but, we'll see. Okay, so moving along with the show from The Guardian, leaders of the world's major cities call for a phase out of fossil fuels. So this is an announcement, a letter timed to go with the COP28 climate conference. So this group is called C40, and it includes mayors from cities like New York, London, Beijing, Paris, Cape Town. Here in Canada, it would be Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto. So basically 40 of the biggest cities in the world. And the mayors have gotten together and said this: we must phase out fossil fuels to protect our climate, but also to protect people from the unjust impacts on their health and standard of living, reads the letter signed by Sadiq Khan. He's the co-chair along with Yvonne Aki Sawyer, the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone. The letter calls for measures to curb the undue influence of the fossil fuel industry, to move public money from fossil fuels to a just and clean energy transition, and partner with us to accelerate action and prosperity. So, yeah, this is a letter from 40 major cities around the world. It sort of leads into, an overall discussion about COP28 that we're going to have. But seems like at least the language around this, I mean, the COP climate conferences are always kind of disappointing because it's very difficult to get the entire world to agree on anything. But the language is shifting. The language is shifting to phase out, and they may not get the COP28 delegates to agree to that language, but that language was not even being heard a couple of years ago at the COP conferences.
Yeah, that is true. It's sometimes not national governments that gets things done. It's state governments. California, they're part of 13 states that are like 60% of the U.S. population. It's not the federal government. I mean, they're doing some good things now and some questionable things, and mayors of big cities do make a difference. London, England.
Just imagine how much better all of these cities will be to live in once the transportation all goes electric or goes to public transport. The city of Toronto had further kind of announcements this week that they've got goals for trying to get to net zero in the city of Toronto. And the 401 highway that goes through Toronto is the busiest highway in North America. And it's one of the widest as well. The 401 stretches from Windsor to Ottawa in Canada. Most of our population is along that highway. Just imagine how much more pleasant it'll be if, the cars on the 401 are electric or downtown New York, all those cars driving around. It's not a pleasant experience to smell all that exhaust. And there's a real, more exciting future for these cities once we can start cleaning up the air, aside even from climate change.
Well, let's dip in the mailbag. It's time to read another letter from our listeners. By the way, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
So this letter says, Dear James and Brian, I just found out about a substantial donation made by Brian to our strategic climate litigation project here in Saskatchewan. Thank you. I cannot tell you how much it means to see such a vote of confidence from you, and we will do everything in our power to honor your contribution and use it to hold the Saskatchewan government and Sask Power accountable. We have not yet actively solicited funding, but we are thinking about starting that process as we have a high-profile expert that may help, subject to fees, in addition to Dr. James Hansen, who is already assisting us, and we really should try to compensate the other experts for their contributions because the entire project has been on a volunteer basis thus far.
I should say that letter's from Glenn Wright, and he says, keep up the great work of the show. Yours in solidarity for a cleaner and sustainable future. Brian, I have issue with one word from his letter, and that is substantial, as in substantial donation. Did you win the lottery? I mean, I started to think, did he win the lottery and not tell anyone? Because that's what I would do if I won the lottery. I wouldn't tell anyone, but they make you tell people. You have to go to a news conference. But yeah, it would be nice not to do that. I would just not tell it. And then I would retire and have a podcast. That's exactly what I would do.
What's substantial is definitely debatable, but I did not win the lottery.
Well, I'm sure the world thanks you for your donation because our government here is very frustrating, to say the least. They are fighting the federal government on carbon taxes. They don't like it. They don't want to pay anything. They don't like anyone talking ill of the oil and gas industry. It's not causing our problems. It's fixing the world. Your phone is made of oil. Therefore, we should continue using it until we die. From CBC, I wanted to continue with this because the Alberta Premier, that's next door to us, oil province, Alberta, Daniel Smith, that is their Premier, their head, their governor, If you're an American, you can't figure out what a premier is. It's like a governor. She told delegates at a climate conference in Calgary, I think it was last Thursday or was the Thursday before, they were achieving an electricity grid that depends on renewable power by 2035 is fantasy thinking. Does anyone, she said, think that it would be possible? She asked this room, does anyone think it would be possible to get all of the siting decisions, the regulatory, First Nations, the different levels of landowner consultation, the environmental issues. Does anyone think that would be possible to get built in 12 years starting now? She asked all those in attendance. Yes, everyone responded. Yes, according to CBC, yes, responded many people in the audience, which included clean energy experts from industry and government and universities, as well as Indigenous and rural communities. And Smith then asked those in attendance what they knew about her industry experts, what they know that her industry experts don't know, and questioned what Alberta would do when there is no sun and no wind. And someone in the audience yelled out, batteries. Obviously, Danielle Smith does not listen to our show, Brian, which is a tragic failure on her part.
And of course, okay, say it's not possible to do in 12 years. Well, at least you could try. If you put it in effort.
Yes, and we're not trying. That's what bugs me. We should be going.
That's what these speeches are all about, is because they don't want to even try.
Right.
But if they tried and they didn't make the 2035 deadline, if they put in an honest effort, everybody would be like, okay, yeah, that's fine.
And they in Saskatchewan and Ontario are like, we're not going to do much now. This is not reliable stuff. We have to wait for nuclear to invent something new and see how that works. We'll just do nothing and hope that works out.
Even Alberta is even saying they will have a clean grid by 2050, which actually seems to kind of invalidate all their arguments. So if it's possible by 2050, then it's probably possible sooner. And if they had any real conviction, they might say, oh, we're not going to clean up the grid at all, but they're not saying that.
Okay, so there's an NGO called ECO, and they are at COP, and they saw Danielle Smith and her 100 oil and gas cronies that she brought with her, and her husband, by the way, who is not an expert, and they wrote a piece on this. So I'm going to read you the whole damn thing, a lot of it, because I think it's important. While the world is here to achieve a fossil fuel phase-out at COP28, Smith is here to deny, delay, and distract on behalf of the oil and gas industry. Yeah, which is what she's doing. She's a premier, a government head who is here to lobby on behalf of the industry. Why? I don't know. But the oil and gas industry have our politicians here in the prairies wrapped up. Friday morning, ECO saw a 100-person convoy of oil crony delegates, the premier of the Canadian province of Alberta, Danielle Smith, arrive at COP28. And at COP, Smith will grandstand her province's tepid, targetless climate plans, quote unquote. But ECO won't lose sight of Smith's real agenda. Smith is here to puncture holes in Article 6, vying to collect carbon credits for expansion of liquefied natural gas and expand its international markets. That is why she's here. When discussing COP28 in a press conference on Tuesday, Smith equated the phase-out of fossil fuels to the phase-out of energy production, period, which is bullcrap. Because the number one growing energy source is renewables. Smith is here to buy big oil precious time with false solutions like carbon capture and utilization and storage. Smith is here to subvert the Canadian government's efforts to meet its Paris commitment, both by fighting a much-needed and long overdue cap on the oil and gas industry's emissions, the sector responsible for an incredible 28% of Canada's emissions and growing, and by threatening to out the country's law on clean electricity. As is Saskatchewan, where we live. Smith is at COP28 to sacrifice a climate-safe future, sling political mud, and enrich her oil buddies. And that, as you could tell from the sound of my voice, makes me mad. Makes me very mad.
Yes. I hope you have your defibrillator handy.
Always, Brian. Always. I wouldn't get through a day without my defibrillator.
So yeah, that from the group ECO. From The Guardian. This is the depressing story of the week. We talked about a similar story a couple of weeks ago. Okay. All the stories are depressing. Let's be honest.
They can be.
Recent studies have figured out that burning fossil fuels leads to approximately 5 million premature deaths around the world. So these are higher than previous studies have found, and these things are always going to be difficult to actually, completely account for. But this was published in the British Medical Journal, and they looked at data from around the world. They assessed excess deaths using data from the Global Burden of Disease 2019 study, as well as NASA satellite-based fine particulate matter and population data, and atmospheric chemistry, aerosol, and relative risk modeling for 2019, and found that there's approximately 8.3 million deaths worldwide were attributable to fine particles and ozone in the ambient air, and of that, 61% were linked to fossil fuels. So that comes to our, figure of about 5.1 million premature deaths per year.
Okay, here's the good news, Brian. Here's the good news. We can stop burning fossil fuels. We have the technology.
Let's do that then.
You saw the $6 million man?
Yeah.
We can make him better, stronger. Well, we have the technology. We don't have the technology to make a bionic man yet, still.
Yeah. Well, but I think like Tony Seba often says, it's, we're moving from an era of energy scarcity to one of energy abundance. And it just seems like people can't wrap their head around that concept, is that they always assume that energy is going to be hard to come by. And that leads us to solutions like nuclear, which is just super difficult and expensive and takes a long time. But people just can't seem to wrap their brain around that's as simple as, put up a solar panel on a battery and you're done.
Yeah, and by the way, if they're going to triple nuclear by 2050, well, I want a shovel in the ground by New Year's Day, okay?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's going to take.
And that
you got to start now.
That came out of COP28 as well, that nations were...
Well, they're saying that. I think the United States and Canada and Britain and France have signed on to that, and some other countries. But it's not really... No one thinks it's going to happen. I don't even think nuclear people think the nuclear industry advocates think it's going to happen.
No, and still kind of it sounds like a minority opinion amongst the nations at COP28.
But the problem is they're going to throw a bunch of money at it. And, you could be throwing money at other things. But that's me. For you nuclear fans, well, congratulations. You should be happy. Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, who is not very popular in the polls these days. In fact, he's getting trashed. They would throw him in a dumpster if they could, the Canadian electorate. He has lost, after 8 years in office, he's lost his appeal.
Yeah, he's reaching his best before date.
Well, he made a video explaining heat pumps. Here it is, part of it.
Electric heat pumps. They're an efficient, affordable, cleaner way to both heat and cool your home. That's why everyone's talking about them. We've been working with provinces and territories right across the country to make sure we're installing heat pumps and phasing out home heating oil. Because the fact is, it's good for the environment, but it's also good for your wallet. It uses a lot of the same technology that you see in fridges or in air conditioners. It draws heat and cool air in and out as you need it, and it is incredibly efficient. So it is much, much cleaner, and it is way cheaper when you get your heat or electric bill at the end of the month. So we want more people on board. We want them off home heating oil, which is incredibly expensive and incredibly dirty, and we want them to move to heat pumps.
That was one of his ministers talking as well. And Brian, they're saying that upfront payment of $250 for low-income to medium-income households, which will be available to those who heat their homes with heating oil. And if they sign up for a heat pump through a joint federal provincial government program, they'll get $250 just for signing up. And a strengthened oil to heat pump affordability program, that is the name of it, will partner with provinces and territories to increase the payout for heat pumps from $10,000 to $15,000, the amount of federal funding eligible to homeowners that they can receive for installing a heat pump, and adding up to an additional $5,000 in grant funding to match the provincial and territorial contributions via a co-delivery arrangement. So that sounds like, yeah, if you're heating with oil, they're going strong on heat pumps. And, I think people, for some reason in Canada, no one knew what a heat pump was. And this became a political issue, and then everyone's trying to learn what a heat pump is. It's nothing that fancy. It's a reverse air conditioner, people. And they've been around for as long as air conditioners.
Yeah,
And they
it's
work,
electric,
and they're getting better. They're getting better in
electric
cold
heating,
climates.
but it's more efficient than regular baseboard electric heat.
3 times at least. This would make the average heat pump free, they say, for lower income households. On average, homeowners who switch from oil to cold climate heat pumps to heat and cool their homes will save $2,500 per year on home energy bills. That's, a little chunk of change to go towards a nice little vacation.
Yeah, that's on average. I'm not expecting that to be
Not you.
the case for me.
No, they've actually run the numbers and for here, and I think it's not. There's some savings, but it's not that much.
Yeah. Okay, from Electric, the state of Michigan has announced a new law to have a clean grid by the year 2040. So this is a law that's just been passed. Michigan is now the 12th state to pass landmark legislation that sets a 100% clean electricity deadline for utilities. And this is going to be tough because the grid in Michigan is not that clean. It's currently the number 3 state, though, for clean energy investments. They've got $21 billion pending. But right now, renewables are providing just 12% of the electricity generation as of 2022, and most of that is wind. So Michigan is going to try and go from 12% renewables to 100% renewables by 2040, which is ambitious, but that's good to see.
It is. And hopefully there's not a change in government and, it doesn't work out. And they're one of many states, and I hope to see more countries and jurisdictions switching to a promise of zero emissions by 2040 or sooner.
Yeah, it helps that it's an actual law. They passed an actual law, and that doesn't mean that a future government wouldn't repeal the law, but it does make it a sort of a harder thing to do, to get rid of in the future.
It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
We got a fat one for you this week, Brian, because of COP28 on now, but from Inside EVs. Hyundai Ioniq 5 and 6 EV sales in USA tripled in November. They tripled from November last year to November this year. Both Novembers had this November had 3 times the sales. So we worry about the sales of electric cars. You know what? Hyundai and Kia, there might be a reason why they're selling cars. It might be the fact that they charge fast. They have the 800 volt architecture on their premium EVs, and that might be a good thing.
If you make good EVs, people want to buy them.
Yeah, and we were worried that they didn't want to sell them, but yeah, they're trying to keep up because Hyundai doesn't have enough supply to meet U.S. demand still, according to its U.S. executives. And I saw a EV6 on the side of the road today. I haven't seen one before, and I drove by it in a poor neighborhood, and it wasn't parked in front of a house. It was parked by a fence, and I wondered if it ran out of electrons or broke down or something. But it was a weird place to see a car. And then I saw 6 Teslas, not 6, but several. That's amazing how many electric cars are around here now. An analysis estimates 32,000 deaths could be averted if the U.S. achieves net zero emissions by 2050. That's from Climate Power. That's a lot of people. I think of a football stadium here. U.S. coal generation is down 20% in 2023 through September and will fall to 1970 levels. Coal will be 16% approximately of U.S. electricity in 2023. U.S. Energy Information Administration says that it's time for a CS Fast Fact. Last year, Canada invested only $2.8 billion in solar energy, but $37 billion in oil and gas investments. That's not what we need to be doing, Brian. That's crap. November was the warmest November on record by a wide margin, beating the prior record set in 2020 by 0.3 degrees. When you beat something by 0.3, that's not good. That's 0.3 Celsius.
No, we haven't had our real winter here yet. We've had some snow, but we have not had the cold temperatures at all.
It's El Nino. A number of oil and gas companies have pledged to cut their methane emissions to near zero by 2030. Methane is a powerful heat-trapping gas, as you know, Brian, that leaks from oil and gas wells, even for years after they've been abandoned, although it dissipates from the atmosphere in 10 years, right? Not like CO2.
Yeah,
it is a greenhouse gas, but it does dissipate.
It dissipates sooner, but its effect when it's up there is worse.
So climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe says this about that. These emissions make up only a small fraction of the total heat-trapping gas emissions from that sector, allowing companies to tout positive action while ignoring the giant in the room, their carbon emissions from burning the damn fossil fuels, which we've got to stop doing.
And leaking methane is one of the things they're trying to reach agreements on at COP28, which is, often in the form of flaring gas wells that we've talked about recently.
Canada today said that they would do something about that in oil industry. I'm skeptical because it has to be enforced, it has to be inspected, and they're going to do that, but I still don't trust it because fossil fuels, well, they're greasy, they're slimy, they're slippery. On Saturday, Colombia became the latest country to join the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. The world has just doubled installed solar capacity in a mere 18 months. We may have mentioned that before. I'm mentioning it again. That's from PV Market Outlook. That is to say, we doubled the amount of solar in the world in 18 months, which is incredible. It's incredible. Germany plows ahead towards its goal of 100% renewable electricity. It has added 11.7 gigawatts of solar and 2.46 gigawatts of onshore wind, about 0.3 gigawatts of offshore wind during the first 10 months. That's just the 10 months, first 10 months of 2023, so they're going hard. India has confirmed its commitment to a global tripling of renewables capacity. That's important and probably going to benefit them in a big ways. EVs with Chinese parts won't qualify for the full $7,500 tax credit from 2024, says Electric.
Yeah, this is the U.S. Tax credit. No, I hadn't heard that yet. There's been talk about some models, depending on where the batteries come from, but this stuff all gets kind of figured out over time.
I don't know if that's really helping the cause of climate, I mean, is it really helping to be a stickler that nothing can be made in China?
Yeah, well, one of the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act is also to encourage U.S. manufacturing. So, those two goals sometimes compete with each other.
So, as mentioned before, lithium-ion battery pack prices have fallen 14% this year to a record low cost per kilowatt hour, and they continue to fall, driven partly by a weaker-than-expected demand, according to analysts. Industry documents show big meat producers. Oh, by the way, when there's a lack of demand and then prices fall, then that creates new demand as, the product becomes cheaper. So It's kind of a swing back and forth, and that's where we're at right now. Industry documents show big meat producers plan a coordinated PR push to present meat as sustainable nutrition. There's that word again, sustainable.
Sustainable.
At COP28, ding, 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 sustainable. It's a watchword for you. If it wasn't bad enough having big oil, you got to have big meat around too. Hitachi will by next March make all of its aluminum products manufactured in Japan from quote unquote green aluminum. Hitachi will buy aluminum ingots from major smelters that use hydropower in countries such as Brazil and New Zealand. This aluminum will then be sent to companies for processing into sheets and other materials. The switch to 100% green aluminum will be completed by March. We'll keep an eye on that, but a lot of people are saying that's a good story, a good news story. The United Arab Emirates announced a $30 billion climate fund that aims to attract $250 billion of investment by the end of the decade. The fund will allocate $25 billion to climate strategies and $5 billion to incentivize investments in the global south. Well, that's good, but stop producing fossil fuels. And finally this week from Bloomberg Green, which is free, by the way, during COP28, including their archives. And I suggest to you to read, because there's a lot of good information, a lot of good reporting, and a lot of good analysis from Bloomberg. They are the leaders in this sort of thing. So China's remote deserts, this is the headline, China's remote deserts are hiding an energy revolution. China has one project that is 455 gigawatts of new renewables based in its deserts, which is the size of the power networks of Brazil, Australia, the UK, and Indonesia combined, or about 455 nuclear power plants at peak output. So, few details are actually known about China's desert developments, they say. They had to go there and ask questions because, China doesn't put out press releases. They're like Tesla in that way. So, yeah, they've had to, not too many details have been disclosed since Xi outlined his vision for the strategy in a 2021 speech. Now, work by Bloomberg News and analysts at Bloomberg NEF went and they visited sites and they interviewed people who are involved in these things, and interviewed people who work in solar and who are doing site analysis and things like that. And they reviewed thousands of pages of government documents and industry databases. And it's offering the first major assessment of the progress that's going on in China, Bloomberg says. The analysis reveals the rollout of solar, wind, and other things that have put China on track to reach record renewables this year. And they far exceed its already world-beating adoption of green energy. So in other words, there's more there than we knew about because they went there and checked things out, and it's quite incredible. They should be touting this. So much clean power is coming online that the country could reach peak emissions well ahead of its 2030 deadline, giving the planet a better chance of keeping global temperatures in check. The speed at which projects are being deployed has already led several forecasters to upgrade their estimates for renewable adoptions this year. China will install more than 300 gigawatts of solar and wind capacity in 2023, almost double the volume from a year earlier. The entire global total in 2022 was 338 gigawatts. Good news story, Brian.
All right, well, I guess that's our show for this week. Please take the time to contact us. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, and around social media, you can find us as Clean Energy Pod.
So donate to the show. We have links in our show notes. You can buy a t-shirt. It doesn't really help us, but it spreads the idea of the show, you know. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast app to get new episodes delivered every week. We hope that you do that. And if you're really kind, you'll give us a nice review on iTunes or similar places, wherever you get your podcasts, because that helps a lot too. See you next week for more COP28 coverage and other things.
See you next week.